Something crossed the highway in front of my headlights, 4 hours north of anywhere that matters. And to this day, I can't tell you what it was. It wasn't a moose. I know what a moose looks like caught in high beams. That stupid, patient stillness, like it's waiting for you to explain yourself. This was low and black and wrong, a shape with too much shoulder and not enough leg, and it crossed the road in maybe a second and a half and was gone into the trees before I'd even finished stamping the brake. I sat there in the middle of the highway, with my hazards ticking and snow sifting down through the headlight beams, and every instinct I had told me not to get out and look. So I didn't. I put the car back in gear and I drove on, and I told myself it was a bear. Bears don't move like that in December, but I told myself anyway, because the alternative was sitting alone on a dark highway, thinking about what else it could have been. My name's Jason. I'm telling you this because a month ago I buried my grandfather next to my grandmother in a cemetery outside a hamlet called Larch Hollow, and I am never going back there, and I think somebody besides me should know why. I grew up in Larch Hollow. My mother had me young and alone, and from what I understood most of my life, she couldn't handle it. Left me with her parents before I was old enough to remember her face, and never came back. My grandparents raised me instead. Good people, the kind who put another plate on the table without being asked. I owed them everything, and I paid it back the only way you can from 4 hours away. A good job in the city, a visit every summer, money when the truck needed work, phone calls on Sundays. I had a whole life down there. A wife, Jess, 7 months pregnant with our daughter, a mortgage, a dog. The kind of life you build specifically so you never have to go back to where you came from. I hadn't been back to Larch Hollow since the spring. My grandmother's last phone call to me had been about nothing in particular. Whether I'd remembered to get the truck's winter tires put on, whether Jess was craving anything strange yet, a story about a neighbor's chickens getting into somebody's garden. Ordinary. The kind of call you don't know to hold on to until it's the last one. Then my grandfather called, and his voice wasn't right, and he told me my grandmother was dead. The official version, the one the coroner signed off on, the one that got repeated at the funeral home in that careful voice people use for things they don't fully believe, was a wildlife attack. She'd gone out for firewood, and something had gotten to her before anyone realized she hadn't come back. My grandfather didn't believe a word of it, and he told me so the first night, over whiskey he poured too heavy for either of us. She didn't go out for firewood, he said. We had 2 cords stacked under the lean-to. She wouldn't have gone near the tree line in December for anything. He said the dog had gone missing around the same time too, bolted into the bush one evening and never came home, which the neighbors chalked up to coyotes, the same way they'd chalk up anything they didn't want to think too hard about. He didn't have an alternative theory. He just knew the official one was a story somebody had decided to tell, and he hated being told stories. I didn't sleep well that first night, and when I finally did, I dreamed about her. In the dream, she was lying in the snow behind the house, with her chest open like a coat somebody had unzipped, and something black and shapeless. No legs I could make out, no arms, just a mass of matted fur the size of a wood stove, came out from behind the tree line and took her by both wrists and dragged her into the dark between the trees. And I stood there and couldn't make my legs move to stop it. I woke up sick to my stomach, and when I came downstairs and smelled bacon frying, I made it exactly to the porch steps before I threw up in the snow. I told my grandfather half the dream, the part where I saw her hurt, not the part with the shape, and he just nodded like a man who'd had the same dream himself and didn't want to admit it either. I went to visit her grave 2 days later with a bundle of flowers that wilted almost the second the cold hit them, and that's where I met Linda. She'd been my grandmother's closest friend since they were girls, small, sharp-eyed, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big for her, standing at the next grave overdoing the same thing I was. We got to talking. She asked how my grandfather was holding up. I asked, carefully, if she believed the wildlife story. Linda had known my grandmother since they were both girls, in the same one-room schoolhouse, back before the highway even reached this far north. She still lived 2 doors down from where I grew up, in a house with a porch light that never went off, winter or summer, and I remembered as a kid always wondering why. Standing there at the grave with a bundle of flowers in her gloved hands, she looked at me for a long moment before she answered, like she was deciding whether I could carry what she was about to say. "There's something that lives out past the tree line," she said. "Been there longer than any of us. The old-timers used to call it the thing in the bush, and leave it at that, because naming a thing gives it more of your attention than it deserves. It doesn't come into town. It stays out past where the road bends into the trees, and mostly it leaves people be, unless you're fool enough to be near the tree line after dark in winter. I saw it myself once, years back, driving my daughter home. Big. Wrong-shaped. I never told anyone but your grandmother, and she believed me, because she'd heard the same stories her whole life, same as I had. She said it had gone quiet for years, and then, this past winter, it hadn't. 2 people dead before my grandmother, and the town had quietly stopped talking about any of it in front of outsiders. She was certain, in the plain, unhysterical way old women get certain about things nobody wants to hear, that it was what took her. I didn't tell my grandfather what Linda said, not that night. I sat on it for 2 more days, watching him get smaller in that big empty house, and on the 3rd night, the night before I was supposed to head home, I finally told him everything. The dream, the shape, what Linda had said at the cemetery. His face did something I'd never seen it do before. Not surprise. Recognition. "She wasn't wrong," he said. And then he told me something he'd kept from me my whole life. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She'd walked to a friend's place one evening for a bag of baby clothes and never come back. 5 days later, the friend showed up at my grandparents' door in hysterics, and my grandfather went out to the tree line with 2 other men and found her near the river. He wouldn't describe it to me in detail, and I didn't ask him to. He said 3 other bodies turned up in the bush that same week, all torn apart in different ways, and after that, the town got quiet and careful in a way it had never fully stopped being since. He'd let everyone believe she left because the truth was worse than being the son of a woman who didn't want him, and because saying it out loud made it real in a way he couldn't stand. We sat with that for a while, the 2 of us, the wood stove ticking as it cooled. He asked me quietly whether I'd noticed anything on the drive up. Not fishing, exactly. More like a man who already suspected the answer and needed to hear it said out loud before he could let himself believe it. I told him then about the shape that crossed the highway on my way in. He went pale in a way that had nothing to do with the whiskey. "That's bad, Jason," he said. "That's it deciding it's noticed you." He wanted me gone that night. We compromised. I'd leave the following evening, like planned, and not a minute later. That night, I had the dream a 3rd time, and this time I saw it clearly. Eyes like a shark's, flat, white, no pupil I could find, and a mouth stretched wide with teeth that didn't belong on anything that walked on legs. It was gnawing on my grandmother's arm, unhurried, the way you'd eat something you weren't in any rush to finish. I swung a branch at it in the dream, and it came apart like smoke and reformed a few feet back, laughing, a wet, delighted little chuckle. And I woke up hearing the crunch of snow just outside the window, which stopped the second my eyes opened. I spent that last afternoon doing small, useless chores around the property, stacking the wood he'd already stacked, checking locks that were already locked, because it felt better than sitting still with what I now knew. Every time I glanced toward the tree line at the edge of the yard, the trees looked the same as they always had, which was somehow worse than if they'd looked different. The truck wouldn't turn over the next morning. By the time my grandfather and I had it running again, the light was already going flat and gray, and he begged me to wait one more night. I should have listened. I've had a month now to sit with exactly how badly I should have listened. But I had a wife 7 months pregnant waiting on me, and every hour in that house felt like an hour too many. So I left anyway, straight into the dark, straight past every piece of advice anybody in that town had given me. The truck died a half a kilometer before the road cleared the tree line. Just quit. No warning light, no cough, no sputter, running fine 1 second and dead the next, coasting to a stop with the trees close on both sides of the road and the snow coming down steady in the headlights. I turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click. I sat there with my hands on the wheel telling myself it was the cold, it was the battery, it was anything at all that had a mechanic's explanation, and I decided to wait it out in the back seat until first light and call for a tow. I don't know how long I slept. I woke up to something scraping along the hood. I killed the interior light with my thumb before I even knew I was doing it, and lay flat across the back seat, not breathing, listening to whatever it was circle once, twice, dragging something, a claw, a limb, I don't know, along the metal hard enough that I felt it through the seat. Then the whole truck rocked sideways like something had leaned its full weight against the driver's door, and I scrambled over the console into the front seat and hit the headlights before I'd even decided to. It was standing broadside in the beam, maybe 15 feet off, and it was the size of 2 grown bears stood shoulder to shoulder. Matted, dark, wrong in a way I still can't fully describe, because my eyes kept sliding off the parts of it that didn't make sense, like my brain refused the input. The eyes were exactly like the dream. White. Flat. It brought one limb down on the hood hard enough to buckle the metal, and it was laughing while it did it. That same wet little chuckle from the dream, except now I could feel it in my chest. I don't remember deciding to pray. I just found myself doing it. Every scrap of anything I'd ever half listened to in a church pew, out loud, my voice cracking on every other word. The blows on the hood stopped as suddenly as they'd started. When I dared to look up, the tree line was empty. Headlights came around the bend, maybe 20 minutes later, and I got out into the middle of the road, waving both arms over my head like a man signaling a plane. The truck slowed. A guy about my age climbed out, already asking if I was hurt, if I needed a lift into town, and I was 3 words into begging him to just take me with him. Right now. Please. When something came out of the trees behind him at a dead run, I dove into his open driver's door and yanked it shut and killed his headlights with a fumbling slap at the dash. And through the windshield, in nothing but the gray wash of moonlight on snow, I watched it take his head off his shoulders in one motion. He didn't even finish falling before it had him, and it fed the way something feeds when it isn't worried about being interrupted. Unhurried, thorough, blood arcing dark across my own truck's windshield 20 feet away. When it was done, it looked directly at the glass I was hiding behind. It grinned at me with a mouth that had no business grinning, dragged what was left of him by one arm, and walked back into the trees like a man heading home after a long day. I don't remember the rest of that night. I remember dawn, and blood in the snow in more places than made sense for one person, and my truck starting on the first try like nothing had ever been wrong with it, and driving faster than I've ever driven a vehicle in my life. I told Jess I'd hit a deer. She believed me, because why wouldn't she? There was truck-sized damage and a story that matched it well enough, and pregnant women have enough to worry about without their husbands telling them the truth. I had the truck fixed at a shop 2 towns over from our place, paid cash, Didn't ask questions about the blood the guy at the counter didn't ask about either. 4 days later, the local news ran a story about a missing couple last seen near a rest stop up north. They found her a week after that, a few kilometers past, where they'd found what little was left of him. I turned the television off and sat in the dark for a long time, not scared for myself anymore, so much as scared for my grandfather, alone in that house at the edge of the tree line. I called him every night after that. He always sounded fine. I always told him I'd made it home without a scratch. Jess started noticing I wasn't sleeping and didn't push, which I was grateful for, because I didn't have an explanation I could give her that wouldn't end our marriage or start a conversation about my mental health that I wasn't ready to have. 3 weeks later, he stopped answering. Jess noticed the pattern before I admitted it to myself. The phone calls getting more frequent, the way I'd go quiet for a few seconds after hanging up each time, like I was listening for something on the other end of a line that had already gone dead. She didn't ask. I think she decided that whatever was wrong with me was something I'd tell her when I was ready, and she was giving me the room to get there in my own time, which I've never properly thanked her for. I called every hour for a full night and got nothing. The next day, nothing. The day after that, nothing. And I was already looking up flights when my phone rang with his number on the screen, and I answered so fast I nearly dropped it. It wasn't him. It was a neighbor, using his phone because he couldn't find any other way to reach me. My grandfather had been attacked outside his own house 4 days earlier. He was already buried. The neighbor apologized for the delay, said it had taken them a while to track down next of kin, and asked if I could come up and settle the estate. I don't remember hanging up. Jess told me later I went white and sat down on the kitchen floor without seeming to notice I'd done it. That night, I dreamed of him. Not hurt, not torn apart, just standing in the kitchen the way he always had, apologizing to me for not being careful enough. I woke up before I could say anything back. I left Jess at home. I drove up alone, met the notary, signed what needed signing, and by the time it was done, the light was already failing, and there wasn't a responsible way to get back on the highway before dark. So I did what I swore I'd never do again. I spent one more night in that house. I boarded what I could, checked every lock twice, took something to help me sleep, and told myself one night was survivable. I woke a little before midnight to footsteps circling the house in the snow. Slow, deliberate. Not hunting, announcing. I lay there telling myself it was a moose, a bear, a neighbor's dog off its chain, anything with 4 legs and no intentions. And I kept telling myself that right up until the chuckle came, low and wet, right outside the window, followed by a voice that was almost words, almost mine to understand, saying something close enough to found you that I've never needed it clarified. It hit the wall once, hard enough to rattle every window in the house at the same time, and then everything went dead silent. The kind of silence that's worse than noise, because it means something is choosing not to make any. I was 3 steps toward the back room when the window behind me came apart, glass everywhere, something opening a line across the back of my hand I didn't feel until much later. I didn't look back to see what did it. I grabbed my keys and my jacket off the hook, and I was out the front door and across the yard before I'd fully processed deciding to run. I got the truck started on the first try. As it turned over, something roared close enough behind me that I felt it in the seat, and for 1 full second in the rearview mirror, I saw its face lit up by my own taillights. And then I was on the road, and I didn't look in that mirror again the entire way home. I don't remember most of the drive. I remember walking through my own front door and Jess's face when she saw my hand. And I remember telling her, finally, everything. All of it. From the shape on the highway, to the man in the road, to the face in the mirror. And I remember that she believed me without a single question, which told me more about how I must have looked than anything else could have. The cut on my hand needed 12 stitches. It's healed into a thin white line now, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. The nightmares have mostly stopped. I sleep most nights, but I am never going back to Larch Hollow. Not for the house, which is sold. Not for my grandparents' graves, which Linda has promised to keep flowers on, because I asked her to, and because I think she understands better than anyone why I can't do it myself. I loved that town once. I think some part of me always will. But I've done the math on how many people I know who went near that tree line after dark, and I'm not interested in finding out if it's finished with me. Some nights, I still catch myself checking the driveway before I lock the door, half expecting to see something standing at the edge of the streetlight, patient, unhurried, waiting for me to forget. I hope it never finds me again. That's the only ending I've got.